Okay, so again, tonight's shir is all about Pesach, even though this is usually the time slot for a Shabbos review, but of course we need a Pesach review. It's my favorite shir to give of the year, Pesach review. We'll see if it needs to be done in two parts. We'll try to cover everything in one part. As you get closer to Pesach, it's harder and harder to get people to come to a shir, understandably. It's maybe harder to get a rabbi to give a shir too. But if need be, we will give a second shir. I enjoyed this class more than any other class because there's no other value of being a rabbi than making people's lives easier. And that's what I hope to do tonight. It's also interesting that a lot of the things that personally I say every year, and I've been saying every year since I've been in the rabbinate. And it's fascinating how many, I'm not speaking about everybody, but there's so many across the spectrum of Judaism, whether someone is Dati Leumi, Haredi, Chadal, doesn't make a difference. So many misconceptions throughout our lives that they need repeating every year, the corrections, because our computer programming just washes away a new idea so quickly based on what we say in the Gemara, our Gersa de Yankasa, what we were taught as children. And this is, everything I say is not to question the deeds of our parents. Everything that our parents did and our grandparents did was correct. But there are reasons. I want to give an example. So I once gave a shir on bug infestation, how to check romaine lettuce, how to check broccoli, raspberries, etc., strawberries. And someone asked a very valid question. My grandmother was firmer than anybody I've ever met since. And she didn't do any of this cleaning. And her father was the great Rav of, I don't know, of Satmar. I mean, how could you suggest that this is what we have to do? The answer to that question is that in your grandparents' time, there was DDT. There was a chemical that they put on produce that indeed, and in the production of produce, that indeed killed all bugs. And since the book, whatever it was called, something, the Dawn, I forget what it's called, in the 1960s, DDT has been largely banned. I always say, the only way to get rid of bugs in produce is the reintroduction of DDT or nuclear war. Neither, I hope, will ever happen. And that's where things change. And we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. So I want to open with something that is so important for people to know. And we tend to view halacha as a hierarchy. You know, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, yeah, that's a mitzvah, but Shabbos and Yom Tiv and the Pesach Seder, that's a real mitzvah. Well, Shabbos, is a kares, I get that. But a Pesach Seder is no more important than v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Just because you emotionally are attached with a mitzvah doesn't make it lesser or greater. And I mention this because on Yom Tif, there's a mitzvah, da'araisa, meaning the mitzvah I'm about to state is more important than shaking a lulav and esrog on Sukkot, aside for the first day. And that's the mitzvah of b'samachta b'chagecha, that we are obligated to be happy and joyous on Yom Tov. This is an essential mitzvah. It's one of the 613 mitzvahs. And you're not allowed to do anything that will sully that joy. And it's so unfortunate that Pesach, which comes to commemorate and to really celebrate our Yetziah, our exodus from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, which was owed, the Gemara tells us, specifically to the women, right? B'schus noshim tzidkanios yotzin in Mitzrayim is only because of the women. The Gemara tells us that we left Egypt. The men were on the lowest rung of impurity. This is a Gemara. If you want the source, I can give you all the sources at the end. But that's the Gemara, and yet it is this very Yom Tov that for women especially, it could be dreadful. There's a song, I don't know if anybody is familiar, but one of my favorite series of albums is called Journeys. They just actually came out with a new album. Journeys 3, if you have Spotify, you can look it up. there's a song called the Pesach Blues, and it's a great song written by Moshe Yes, or sung by Moshe Yes, who's a Baal Tshuva. He had a record deal with CBS. In fact, some of his Jewish records were on the CBS label because he still had a contract with them. Anyway, it's a great song, and it's from the perspective of a woman and how much they dread Pesach, and they can't wait for Mashiach to come to set her free. So I want to speak both to the women and the men. First and foremost, I want to talk about chumrah. So that's going to be very brief. I want to just say something. You are not allowed. What is a stringency? So let's take something like Sheishes Yomim Ta'avod, 6 days of the week you should work. Uviyom HaShvi, on the 7th day you rest. So if I want to say to myself, I get it that the Torah wants 6 days of work and 1 day of rest, I'm going to be stringent, and I'm going to say, Chameshes Yomim Ta'avod, I'm only going to work 5 days of the week, and I'm going to keep Shabbos 2 days of the week. Am I allowed to do that? Absolutely not. In fact, the Torah says, Ba'al Tosef, you're not allowed to add to the Torah. So where does a chumrah come in? If I'm not allowed to add an extra day of Shabbos, what is the concept of a chumrah? So right now, we're in an impasse because it seems that we have to be machmir, stringent, relating to chumros. Taking on a chumrah might be a great leniency, both because it might be Baal Tosef, maybe adding to the Torah. We'll discuss that in a moment. And secondly, you may be ruining your Simchas Yom Tov. I am not referring to a minhag in your family. If your minhag is to do X, then you have to do X. The Arizal says that anybody who is careful with even a trifle of chametz will be saved from sin the entire year. So that's all very important. But you have to be made aware, and the Shlah HaKadosh, the Holy Shlah, tells us that rabbis, have to make a distinction between Halacha and Hashgacha. I don't know if I've shared the story before, but I'm sure I did. I had a friend when I was in yeshiva, had tickets to the Devils game, and a hockey team. And he wasn't sure if he's allowed to go as a yeshiva student. So he picked up the phone and he called Rav David Feinstein. So David Feinstein, as normal as he was, he didn't know the names of NHL teams. So imagine you're David Feinstein, you get a shayla, could I go see the Devils? He didn't know what the guy was talking about. But finally the guy explained, he's a hockey. So he said, it's not a halachic question. You have to ask your Rebbe if he thinks philosophically you should go while you're in yeshiva. And it's such a beautiful story as a Rav should only answer halachically. So let me tell you halachically what is a chumrah and what is not a chumrah. And this is just the opening tonight. So a proper chumrah has to either come from your parents or be rooted in Jewish law. What does that mean, rooted in Jewish law? So let's say you want to assume a chumrah for yourself. That is forbidden. You cannot make up a chumrah. You may be violating 2 biblical prohibitions. So what is the type of chumrah that you could take on? You could take on a chumrah of uncertainty. I'll explain what that means in a moment. And you could take on a chumrah when there's a debate. Rav Moshe Feinstein says this, the Satmar Rebbe says that. The Ramban says this, and the Ramah says that. And we follow the lenient view, and you want to take on the stringent view. That maybe then you could take on. But you have to speak to a Rav before you take it on. So let's give some examples in the process of Pesach. An expression called spring cleaning. There's an expression called spring cleaning. And that I think comes from Pesach because as we talked about by Purim time, even the idea of costumes, Mardi Gras was born from that, and all these other festivals. We've been around, the Jews, and we've always been cleaning for Pesach. It's interesting. During the Spanish Inquisition, the years leading up to it, Isabella, they would put out proclamations of faith. How do you tell if your neighbors are Jewish? So one of the ways, if they don't eat pork, but one of them is if they eat cholent. If they cook Friday night a stew that's still hot Shabbos day, Isabella said that maybe they're conversos. I don't know if you know that story. We've actually influenced because we've been around. And the idea of spring cleaning probably comes from us. But that doesn't mean that our Pesach cleaning has to be spring cleaning. So what do I mean by that? People want to move their oven or move the refrigerator to clean behind it. It's a very nice chumrah, I guess, but you don't have to do that. The halacha is that if chametz is behind a very heavy object that you're not planning on moving, unless you happen to know that fresh chametz is there, there's no obligation to move it, period. Period. Now, in your grandmother's day, maybe the appliances weren't heavy. Maybe she's not the one who did it. Maybe someone else did it. You have to find out if that's really your minhag. Lining a refrigerator. For what reason? Are you cooking in your refrigerator? The idea of food transfer does not happen without heat. Lining cupboards. Why? Does your cupboard serve also as a microwave? There's no reason to line your cupboards. Now, if your cupboards are filthy and it's of cheap wood and you've spilled and your kids have spilled so many things over the years, I get it. That's on a case-by-case basis. But generally speaking, this is not necessary. And if your kids did spill things and it's stained, call me. It's probably no reason that you have to cover it anyway. Now, again, if you have a specific minhag and you know it's a true minhag in your family, fine. The next important thing about chumros is just because you're married doesn't make you in control. There is a myth in Judaism that when one gets married, she takes on the customs of the husband. This is not a Mishnah. This is not a Gemara. This is not mentioned anywhere. It's certainly not one of the 10 commandments, which most people assume it is. The idea of two people getting married who have different customs is an American reality. It didn't exist 400 years ago. People were born and they died within a 10-mile radius. The idea of marrying someone who didn't have the same provincial rav was a dream. It started a little bit in Amsterdam and especially in America, or Moshe Feinstein, when he discusses this, he calls America a melting pot and he says, now what do you do? So yes, it's true that when it comes to raising the children, you have to decide on one custom, and generally we follow the husband. But by things of the kitchen or lighting Shabbos candles, then you actually follow the wife. But that doesn't mean that the wife loses her personal customs. So, for example, in my opinion, a woman will continue to daven the same nusach she always davened. Just because she married a Sephardi doesn't mean she switches Sidurim. In fact, I would say she shouldn't. How does it relate to Pesach? So the husband comes home from work, and it's a week before Pesach, and he says, did you clean behind the refrigerator? And you say, the rabbi said I don't have to. And he says, what? Are we from? We're not lining our refrigerators? That's fine. If he wants to be stringent, that's fine. And you should show him where the cleaning supplies are kept so he could take care of his own personal chumrah. This is, again, where Moshe Feinstein writes in a tshuva, a wife has her own relationship with God, and the husband has his own relationship with God. And one cannot force the other unless it affects the kids or affects halacha. Then you have a question. But if it doesn't affect halacha and the husband can't marshal any rav who says this is an obligation, now if your personal rav says it's an obligation, that's something else. But I doubt there's any rav. I don't know of any rav who says halachically you have to line your cupboards. I don't know of any rav who says that. Or I don't know any rav who says that halachically you have to move a heavy amoir and clean behind it. But if you want to be makbid, that's your problem. It's not your spouse's problem. And that's something else very important. So let's just review the few very important points we made. There's a biblical obligation to be happy on Yom Tov, and you have to weigh that biblical obligation against any rabbinic stringency minhag that you're dealing with. That's number one. Number two, if it's a minhag from your parents or rebbeim, that's non-negotiable. You have to follow that. And if you want to break from that, you have to speak to a rav and be mater neder. There's a process. Number three, taking on a chumrah might be its own biblical violation of adding to the Torah, depending on what type of stringency. So let me give you an example of a stringency that I believe might be a violation of Jewish law. And I've argued with Rabbanim about this for years, and I want to tell you, I've had very little impact, if any, on the Jewish world. I just got a text today. I don't have Facebook. Someone sent me a text of a picture of me with the mayor and the head of the fire department and other people. 10 years ago today was when we made the Eruv in Buffalo. And I looked at the picture, I got very emotional because that's like something that's a real accomplishment. If there's one other accomplishment I could think of that affected it, really had a powerful impact. I don't mean, every rabbi gets a chance to inspire people, make them feel better, but I mean a real universal impact. Well, the first year, or maybe it was the second or third year, I was a rabbi, so I inherited a Pesach list from Rabbi Milevsky that he would send out that said, these, 15 items don't need a Hashgacha for Pesach. And I said, you know what? And then people would buy the Star K book and Rabbi Blumenkrantz's book, and I would read them, and I had my own opinions. And I said, you know what? I'm going to write my own book. And little by little, I added to that book. So, and Baruch Hashem, this year, like the past 4 years, the Spot of Queens buys my book from me, and they send it out themselves. But when I first put out that book, it started off, I think it was only 20 pages. I said, all pill form medications, meaning any medication that has no flavor and you swallow whole, does not need to be kosher lePesach. In fact, you could even know that it contains chametz. It could be called chametz pills. For those that aren't getting enough gluten over Passover, we now present chametz pills. It is 1000% okay to take halachically. Now, I want to explain to you, if you allow me, if you would humor me for a moment and make this into a real shir. Let me spend the next 5 minutes explain to you. Yes.
It shouldn't be any different for regular medicine, say, in a gel cap.
Gel caps a different shiloh, but gel caps, I believe, are fine. There are stringencies. For those who may not know, gel cap contains gelatin. It can be made from pork or other non-kosher meat. Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, if you want to be strict, it's better not to use a gel cap. If you have a gel cap, maybe put a small piece of tissue around it. But I'll explain to you the difference in a moment. So let me explain halachically. I want to convince you that when the Marsham, a very famous Hasidic Pesach, when he got smicha, his father told him there are 4 types of rabbis. There is a Machmir, a Mekel, a Kal, and a Chamor. Those are the 4 types. A Machmir and a Chamor and a Mekel and a Kal. Out of those 4, you should be a Mekel. So if you know a little bit of Rabbinic Hebrew, you get the joke. But basically, there's a difference between someone who, while erring on the side of caution, is generally lenient versus someone who takes halacha lightly. I do not take halacha lightly at all. But this is not a case of even being lenient. So let me explain. The Torah tells us that you're allowed to own chametz on Pesach if it's so disgusting that even a what wouldn't eat it. Who wants to unmute yourself? If something is so disgusting that even a dog. Nifsal ma'achilas kelev. So there's a prohibition on Pesach to have chametz in your home. But if it's chametz nukshe, if a dog wouldn't eat it, it's fine. Now, great. Have you ever bit into a Tylenol? In fact, doctors will tell you in pharmaceutical companies, they actually put agents inside pills because they have time-release elements so that you shouldn't chew it. That's why it's purposely to be disgusting. In fact, it's purposely to be disgusting for animals because they don't want children or your pets to eat it. Like, it's never in the history of humankind had you had a truer nifsa ma'achilas kelef. Now, that's it. So pills are fine, right? So what happened? Well, about 700 years ago, Rabbeinu Asher, very important Rishon, came along and he said, when the Gemara said that something that's inedible to even a dog, you're allowed to, it's not considered chametz, that's if it's in your house. But if you actually eat it, then you're uplifting its status. That's a halachic term called achshave. And now, rabbinically, it's considered food. Now, we don't follow this opinion. It's a das yachid, meaning it's a singular opinion by a very holy person, like all of its singular opinions. But the vast majority disagree with him. But let's even say he's right. Let's even say that a pill is not chametz because a dog wouldn't eat it, but you're eating it. So maybe by you eating it, you're uplifting its status. It's one thing to have pills in your house that are chametz. So we're still only dealing with a rabbinical problem, according to one opinion. So someone wrote a letter to Moshe Feinstein saying that he has pills and he knows they contain chametz. So Moshe Feinstein says, let's work this through. Pills aren't edible. Now, you have an opinion of Rabbeinu Asher who says it's a rabbinical concern. We don't even follow his opinion. So when you deal with a health crisis and a rabbinical concern, the health crisis wins. But Ramosha says, forget that. He said, even Rabbeinu Asher, even this singular opinion with a rabbinical concern, it wouldn't come here because you're not eating. A pill is not considered eating. No one says after Yom Kippur, boy, am I hungry. And what are you eating? Kokish cake. What are you eating? 10 times orange juice. What are you eating? 6 Advils and 2 Tylenols and a Lipitor. It's unheard of. It's not considered eating. You're swallowing. You're swallowing it whole. There's no hanas gurono, to use the Gemara's language. There's no pleasure center of the mouth and the tongue and saliva and all your taste buds. It doesn't happen. Unless it's an Advil, by the way. Advils, this is true, have an orange coating that does have a flavor. And that should, in my opinion, should be avoided on Pesach. I don't know why that's not in other guides. So, Moshe is not alone. I have never seen a posek say different. The Ksav Sofer in the 1800s was asked this question. Said, what are you talking about? Of course you could take pills. And by the way, we're not talking about even where you know there's chametz. Ramosha, the Ksav Sofer of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the Chazon Ish, everybody who was asked were asked about pills that they knew had chametz. It's still okay. So what do we do in America? We go out of our way to find out if something has chametz. That is like beyond no one heard of. So here you have a rabbinic concern according to one opinion, and versus what? People not taking their Lipitor because they couldn't get a hold of the rabbi on Chalamayit. Because I go on a family trip, so someone doesn't take their medicine. So anyway, I put this in my guide. I don't know. I'm embarrassed to say how many years ago. I feel so old. It must be 18 years ago now. I got a phone call from someone who's maybe one of, if not the most famous person in the world of kashrus, saying, well, how could you write this? And I was younger and much brasher. If you think I'm brash now, you should have met me in my 20s. I said to him, show me a source that disagrees with me. Go to your vad, your rabbanim, and ask them. If they are on record that they agree with you and not me, I will take it off. The next year, their guide said the same thing. And now, except for the Star K, every guide says the same thing. So I said, there are very few things that I've had a national impact. I take this to Shemayim as a schus, that I believe that I'm partially responsible for this change. If I had my druthers, the Star K's medicine guide will not be sold in stores. Are there people who have a Mesorah from their parents that they don't have pills? Fine. But when you sell it in a store, and Rabbanim should have access to that information. But when you sell it in the stores, the average person who cannot tell you the Jewish year without Googling it are just going to make an assumption that will cost lives. And it's absolutely forbidden. And Rabbanim should be very, very careful. So take this to the bank. All pill for medications are fine, no matter what. When it's even a vitamin, what?
Vitamin C.
Okay, so vitamins was the next thing I was going to discuss. If you're taking a vitamin, now vitamin C has flavor. The flavor typically comes from kidneys. There's citric acid added to it. So if a vitamin is taken, kidneys is not a concern. But if you're taking vitamins, what's a medicine? What makes something a medicine? You know, if I know someone, this is true, who had, I forget if it was high blood sugar or high cholesterol, and she drank celery juice for like 2 months straight. And she got her blood pressure down, whatever it was. So I'm not saying you should do that. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just telling you a story that someone told me. Don't listen to your doctors. Okay, I'm just telling you a story. So is that medicine? What makes medicine? If I told you that the bark of a willow tree, you know, if you eat that, your fever will be cured. Is that medicine? Well, that's what aspirin is, right? Aspirin, the Bayer company became wealthy because Hippocrates used to tell his students to eat the bark of a willow tree. And no one knew why, and they figured out the chemical structure, and that's where your aspirin comes from. Ad hayom hazeh, Wikipedia. I think it's a willow tree. You can look it up. If someone on Wikipedia is it bark of a willow or an oak tree, I forget. So medicine just means something that a doctor feels you should take, or medically it makes you feel better. So if it's in a pill form, it's fine. End of discussion. So all vitamins and pills and minerals that you need to take for health reasons, and don't even look. Don't have to look into it if it's chametz. How's that? Okay, so that's number one. Kula you could take to the bank. That is so vital that everybody has to know. Don't look at medicine guides. Don't buy medicine guides. And you could quote me. You could say in my exact words. And if a rabbi respectfully challenges, tell him to call me up. I will defend it, and as I have for many years. And Baruch Hashem, as I said, every other Pesach guide seems to agree now. Now, what about what?
Metamucil?
Okay, so everybody's getting to exactly the next thing I'm going to say right before I say it, which I like. That means I'm going in a logical order. So far, we discussed medicine in pill form. And then there's medicine in chewable form, liquid form. Or powder form that you mix. So for that, in the Pesach guide that we sent out the other day, it wasn't the complete guide, it was just the product list. We did list all types of medications that I'm aware of. If you want, if anything's missing, you could send me from other guides that I'm aware of that you can take. So chewable medications for children, for adults, amoxicillin that's drinkable, antacids, Pepto-Bismol, those, of course, you would need to make sure there's no chametz. If you're not feeling well, the kidneys is not even a concern. And we have a list. So Pepto-Bismol, for example, original flavor is fine on Pesach. Metamucil, the orange has kidneys. So I would allow someone to have kidneys if they're not feeling well. A decree doesn't apply when you're sick. But if there's another type, which is the original, and I know how disgusting the original one is. I know it's disgusting. But in my opinion, you should have the original, not the orange. If having the original means you're not probably going to take it, and your constipation and other IBS issues are going to act up, fine, then take the orange. So, I would buy the original and the orange, and then hopefully the orange you could handle. If you really can't handle it and there's nothing you can mix it with to make it go down, then have the orange. The orange has kidneys. So you can look at my medicine guide. I go through which medicines, chewables and liquids and antacids that you can have and give your children on Pesach. To me, that's the most important part of the guide, because kids get sick on Pesach, people run to the drugstore and they really panic. If one of the more major vadim who's very popular online, you go on their medicine guide for Pesach, they say everything is forbidden. I don't know why they do that. There are people, especially Rav Gershon Bess, the Lakewood Kollel in Los Angeles, who spends the whole year on this. He calls every pharmaceutical company about all their liquid medications and their chewable medications. Granted, he also calls them about their pill medications. And I've argued respectfully with him about this. Respectfully, I don't know if he remembers my emails and phone calls over the years, but he feels that a list needs to be out there. Okay, so we discuss chumros in general. We discuss pill forms, and chumros in general should only be kept if it's a mesorah from your parents. Otherwise, it is absolutely forbidden to take on a chumrah, because you may be actually being lenient in adding to the Torah. We also discussed a husband and a wife should not take on a chumrah for the other person. Now let's briefly cover cleaning, at least this week, because before we get into other matters, actually before we get to cleaning, once I mention pills, let me say some other things that don't need a hashgacha. So in my product guide, I list all the things that don't need hashgacha. What's great also is I've tried to include, like, almond flour needs hashgacha, but there are many brands of almond flour that don't. So on the OU guide, they're going to list the ones under them that don't need hashgacha, and in the Star K guide, they're going to list the ones under them. And then, so I try to put all those together in one place. Here are all the almond flours that don't need hashgacha. Here are all the brown sugars that don't need hashgacha. Here are all the coconut milk and coconut oil, Coconuts become very popular, and xylitol. So there are, even though there are many products that need a hashgacha for Pesach, there are certain companies that we know don't have chametz, and there's no time to go through all of those. Look at the product guide. We did it color coded this year, make it very simple. So green means you can buy it without a hashgacha. Yellow means it needs a hashgacha for Pesach. Red means you can never buy it before or after Pesach. And blue means you could eat it on Pesach, but you should purchase it before Pesach. But to give some examples that are very helpful for you, very important. All soaps, mascaras, powders, shampoos, conditioners, body washes, they're all fine on Pesach. You don't have to look at their ingredients. You don't have to look at which soap is okay for Pesach. All soaps, all shampoos, all powders, all creams. So what is a concern out of the inedible house products? Which types of inedibles are a concern? It has to be one of two things to be a concern. It's in your mouth, like lipstick, right? Or chapstick. I'm not saying most lipsticks are fine and many chapsticks are fine. That's number one. Or it's in pure liquid form. So a spray deodorant, which is in pure liquid form, or what's another example of something that's in pure liquid form? Nail polish remover, anything that's in watery form, that you want to make sure doesn't contain chametz. That's a stringency, by the way, a huge stringency, but it's a stringency that we have to follow. The reason we follow that stringency is because denatured alcohol, there is a way to make it drinkable. And in Europe, poor people, non-Jews, would make it drinkable, and they would drink perfume and cologne. They would buy or find in garbage cheap perfume, cologne, deodorants, and figure out a way to chemically alter it so that they could drink it. My father-in-law still has in his house, or he's told me about it so many times, the cover of the Globe and Mail or the Toronto Star, one of the big Canadian newspapers, about a bunch of bums on the street who passed out from drinking like Arid or Right Guard or something like that. This still happens. So this is a stringency. So things that are in pure liquid form, we try to avoid. So spray deodorant, you should look at the guide, which ones you could buy without hashgacha. Cologne or perfume, just you can look, if you have a perfume that you like, you don't have to call your rabbi about perfumes. I never found that to be very tznius. It's much easier if I just tell you what I would do. So if you called me up tomorrow and said, look, you said all non-edibles are fine unless it's in liquid form, right? I say, right. My Lever 2000 is fine, yes. My Old Spice body wash or roll-on deodorant, yes. How about my secret spray deodorant? Again, I don't find it tznius, women calling up rabbis discussing deodorants and perfume. I find it very inappropriate. So not that if you shouldn't be embarrassed to call me. I don't like that in the world that exists. I think we should make things more simpler. So if you use Secret, or if you use Chanel No. 5, let's just say, because that's the only perfume I know by name, because everybody knows that perfume. So if you use Chanel No. 5, instead of calling your rabbi and saying, here's a much easier trick. You know it's in liquid form, like all perfumes. Go online, find the inactive ingredients or the active ingredients, and you just want to make sure there's no alcohol. And if there is alcohol, it's synthetic. Synthetic alcohol is called isopropyl. But if it says ethyl or ethanol alcohol or denatured alcohol, any of those three, denatured, ethyl, or ethanol, don't use it. If it doesn't say that, use it. That's it. That's all the rabbi's going to do. Well, most rabbis will just look at a list, but I hope they're sophisticated enough to look it up online. It's very simple. So let's actually do this as an experiment. Okay, let's together go look up what I would do. Let me share my screen. Could someone want to give me another type of perfume? Give me a name.
Shalimar.
What?
Shalimar.
You had to give me the hardest to spell. How do you spell it?
SHALI. SHALIMAR.
Perfume?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is all I would do. So now you see exactly what I would do. You can do this. You could call me. I'm not trying to There's nothing wrong if you call me. I just don't want it in Yiddishkeit that it's set in stone that women call Rabbanim about their perfume. We live in crazy times. And okay, let's see. So this is it, right? Okay, so let's see ingredients. This better work. Okay, the fragrance contains notes. Okay, that's not going to help me. That's not going to help me. 1 second. Takes a minute. I never said what I do for a living is interesting. You just have to sit here and watch me do it. Wow. Is this a popular perfume?
Yes.
Let's try it here. Okay. Okay, in this case, I'd have to call the company. Base notes. Oh. Rate only the most important ingredients you sense. Let me try one more. All right, didn't work. But anyway, you get the point. That's all I would do. And if I couldn't find out, I would call the company. And if I still couldn't find out, I would probably tell you can use it. Because again, it's such a far-fetched concern that if there's no evidence, we're obligated to look for the evidence, then we could go ahead and utilize it. Okay, it's
Rabbi
8:40.
Taub, may
Go
I
ahead.
ask you?
Sure.
I have a problem with being able to use dishwashing liquid without a texture. That's going right on your dishes. So why is that okay?
Dishwashing soap, first of all, Palmolive is fine. We know it contains no chametz. It's complicated, but generally, we know it goes into cleaning products today. In America today, they're very careful due to allergens. So many allergies out there that they generally put synthetic product in. The chances of there being chametz is very far-fetched. But let's even say there is chametz in it. It's inedible. It's inedible, and you're never going to eat it. So the concern is very far-fetched. Moshe Feinstein felt that even toothpaste that it contains chametz is not a problem. We're strict. So I would advise on dishwashing soap to be strict. But Susan, it's not a halachic concern. It's a far-fetched halachic concern. But it's a nice idea to be strict. On toothpaste too, all Colgate is fine, all Crest is fine, and all Aim is fine. For other brands, call me and I'll tell you, but all those three you can buy. So there's an example of something that we still are strict in, but that goes into your mouth. It's similar to lipstick, because that's a cream, that's not in a liquid form. And based on the rules we're saying, and we don't eat it. So based on the rules we're saying, it should be fine. But because it goes in your mouth, and because, like you're saying, goes on your dishes, even though halachically it's fine, like lipstick, like toothpaste, like dishwashing soap, and like perfume, liquid form, those are the things we're strict about. So just to review, spray deodorant, concern, it's in liquid form. Perfume, cologne, concern. How do you get rid of the concern? Find out what the ingredients are. So long as there's no denatured alcohol, ethyl or ethanol alcohol, you're good to go. Dishwashing soap, you should stick with Palmolive or any others I have on the list. And toothpaste, stick with Colgate, Crest, and Aim. By the way, the same applies for, yeah, go ahead.
Rabbi Tao,
Yes.
we're still in a somewhat COVID world. Most of the hand sanitizers are ethyl alcohol. They're not liquid, they're sort of gel. Can they be used?
You're asking, you could mute me, because here's something just to show you I'm not a cow. Every agency and every website, they all say they're fine. And if you look at my guide, I say Purell, for example, is not okay. It's in big red. That's because it contains ethyl or ethanol. Now, you're asking a very good question, but it's not really a liquid. 5 years ago, there were cases all over the country of high school students getting drunk on Purell. I don't know if you remember this. If the concern of liquids with chametz is not because we eat it, but because it's a kares, it's a serious penalty. So anything that people are utilizing as a liquid or ingesting for enjoyment, we have to be careful about. And that's why liquids are a problem. It's not because they're liquids, it's because that's what people are ingesting on the street. And we know that high school students have been and are ingesting hand sanitizers, believe it or not. Do you know that our shul, beginning of COVID, so there were no hand sanitizers left. So there was a gin company. People in the shul, I don't know if you remember this. There was a gin company that turned their gin distillery into a hand sanitizer thing. And we still have it underneath the bima in shul. It stunk like gin. I still use it because under the bima, every Shabbat I put it on my hand and I just stink like gin. And it's so powerful, but it's made out of real alcohol. And a lot of other vodka, gin, and bourbon facilities became, at the beginning of COVID, you could Google it, there are a lot of news stories about this, became hand sanitizers units or manufacturers. So I believe that a hand sanitizer, you have to make sure, I check every year during COVID, I check to make sure that our hand sanitizer, last year, if I'm not mistaken, we ordered special hand sanitizers that we knew were made from isopropyl alcohol and not from ethyl, denatured, or ethanol. So yes, in my opinion, hand sanitizers, you have to make sure it doesn't contain these ingredients. So one chumrah for tonight. Any other questions before I go on? I want to take an extra 5 more minutes to discuss some other matters. Next week we'll talk about kashrut, but I do want to talk about some general principles of shopping for Pesach. There are certain concerns that you should be aware of. So peeled vegetables, you could find baby carrots, you could find peeled potatoes. That could be a major concern, because if you peeled a carrot and put it in your fridge, what would happen to it? What would happen to it? It would oxidize. In fact, baby carrots, they don't grow as baby carrots. You could buy real baby carrots. Those are very expensive. As we all know this, the baby carrots that we have are from big carrots that go into a machine and they cut it down into small sizes. That's all baby carrots are in the stores today. So when you buy a baby carrot, how come they're so bright orange and red? Well, they put on it a chemical that arrests any oxidation. Oftentimes that comes from kidneys. So I would advise that any vegetables you buy, at the very least, you should wash off. I'm fine with buying baby carrots without Hashgacha for Pesach, but I would advise again to wash off. Just going through some other quick things people should be aware of. Baby wipes is another common threat because they could contain liquid alcohol. You want to check the alcohol in them. That's something very important. As I also mentioned, look at my Pesach guide. I tried to combine all the coconut flours, the coconut milks, the soy milks, the rice milks, although kidneys. Let's also talk about coffee very quickly. Nespresso, I'm proud to announce, I don't know if there's any other Pesach guide that does it. You can tell me. I looked around and the bad day we couldn't find. We've done it for the past 4 years. We always get a hold of the Switzerland based Hashgacha for Nespresso. Virtually all Nespresso pods are kosher to Pesach. If they're not decaf and they're not flavored, you'll be amazed. There's like 150 types of unflavored non-decaf coffee. They're almost all okay for Pesach. Decaf coffee contains an ingredient called maltodextrin. Maltodextrin comes from chametz or kidneys. Because of that, you have to buy a decaf that's kosher lepesach. But if you look at my list, there are some non-Jewish brands whose decaf is okay, who either don't use maltodextrin, or if they use it, they use a kosher lepesach one. So coffee is something that's not so simple. but it is simple. Again, when it comes to non-instant coffee, ground coffee, ground coffee, excuse me, even Keurig K-cups, Nespresso, or just going to the store and getting plain ground, unflavored, non-decaf coffee is all fine for Pesach. Again, all Keurig pods that are plain and non-decaf, all Nespresso that are plain and non-decaf, all ground coffee from the store that's plain and non-decaf, it's fine. Once you get into the instant category and or the decaf category, you should look at the list. So we have a great list. A Via instant coffee is fine. I forget what we said about the Starbucks instant coffee. There's so many things on the list. You could look it up. The value of the list is not just the list. It's what's underneath each item. We went to great length to try to find everything we can that's acceptable. What other things can I tell you quickly in the next couple of minutes? Okay, I'm going to stop here. I'll leave 10 minutes open for questions. Next week, again, we're going to discuss the laws of tefillas, kalim, kashering, and we'll also discuss measurements. You know, how much wine do I have to drink? How much matzah do I have to eat? Some of the quick laws of leaning, all in the goal of making your Pesach Seder more enjoyable. I've known many people in my life who spent their Pesach with Gedolim, who had a Seder with Rav Moshe Feinstein, with Rabbi Soloveitchik, with Rabbi Yashiv, with Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky. And whenever I met people like this, and I would ask them, what was the Seder like by your father, by their Rosh Hashiva, whoever it may be, they would always say the same thing. You probably think that they were, building mountains of Torah and talking to angels. They were just playing with the kids. They were making it exciting for the children. And if we don't have children by our Seder, a simple Seder, just talking simply about Yetzias Mitzrayim, making it enjoyable is so important. And we'll talk about ways, halachic ways, to make the Seder more accessible and kashering more accessible. Although I found that over the past 10 years, people don't kasher so much anymore. Plastics have become so accessible and so beautiful that that's becoming far more frequent on Pesach, or due to our relative wealth, we have Pesach dishes. But nevertheless, we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about the laws of tefillas kalim, because this is the best time to review those laws. People get the most amount of new material, pots and pans, over Pesach, and I think there are certain things people are tefilling that don't need tefillah. Unfortunately, there are things that need tefillah that people aren't tefilling. Okay, next 5 minutes. Anybody have any questions about products of use on Pesach? Any questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, it's hard for me to see the list to go through everything, but I was in errands a few years ago, and in the kosher for Pesach section, they had the liquid lemon. I forget what it's called.
Real lime?
Yes, real lemon.
Real
And there
lemon
was
and real
no-
lime can be bought without a hashgacha for Pesach.
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to
You
know.
know, what I would advise, I told someone else, is if you download the list the shul sent out, it's just a product guide and a medicine guide. That's all it is. When you're in the store, not in errands, because you could trust what they're doing, but if you're in like Food Town, you want to know, can I buy sugar? Just do the finder on your phone for sugar on the list, and it goes right to sugar and it will tell you. Domino sugar, for example, brown, all their major sugar products, not confectionery sugar, but brown and regular sugar could be purchased without a P. It happens to have a P all year round. Confectionery sugar is a problem because they add cornstarch to it. You know, confectionery sugar, people think the cornstarch or the potato starch that they add to it is what makes it so thin. You can make confectionery sugar at home. If you put sugar in a blender or food processor and you just let it keep going, it's going to turn into confectionery sugar. People spend so much money on confectionery sugar for Pesach. Just buy cheap sugar, throw it in your food processor, put it on for 5 minutes. You'll get yourself confectionery sugar. Believe me, I used to certify the largest generic sugar manufacturer in the United States. I watched them do it. The purpose for the kitnius that they add to it is so it flows better. That's the whole reason they do it, so it flows out of the package. So years ago, there was a Hasidic Hashgacha that wanted to make kosher Pesach confectionery sugar. So what do? Either you don't add a starch to it, which makes a clump, or in that case, they added cocoa. And you went to the store and you saw like it has a brown tinge. Certain Hasidic confectionery sugars for Pesach, you may notice has a slight brown tinge to it. Don't be grossed out. It's just cocoa. They need something to let it flow. So besides confectionery sugars, any BVK in the Buffalo Badakasheros, there's a lot of sugars in ShopRite, in Walmart that have my Hashgacha. Their brown sugar and white sugar does not need a Hashgacha. So many things don't need a Hashgacha, and so many things do. So, olive oil, plain 100% virgin olive oil does not need a Hashgacha. Get the list. It's only 4 or 5 pages of items There's no learning. There's no Tosfos. There's no Shulchan Aruch. It's just aluminum foil, paper towel. Just go through the list, and you'll see interesting piece of information. It will take you no more than 15 minutes, and I hope it will make your shopping experience better. And most importantly, the last pages list chewable and liquid medicines. Anybody else have questions on the share tonight?
Thank you.
Okay, everybody relax, enjoy Pesach. Remember the pasuk, Deracheha darchei noam. The Torah's ways are pleasant. If it's not making you feel pleasant, you're doing it wrong.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
one other thing that I grew up, it was not an issue, but it's like you said, water now, all of a sudden, a lot of the bottles have to have.
No. All water
Seltzer.
is fine. And not only that, I'll tell you something else. All water, spring water, mineral water, tap water is all fine, as long as
Okay.
it's not flavored. Seltzer, this is something-
Unflavored.
unflavored is fine. So seltzer, as my wife would attest, we were also the first Maivad to put out in our guide. This is now 10 years ago, where I said used to go to the store. What was the brand called with the blue thing around it?
Vintage.
What?
Vintage.
They had
I
a key
think
on it,
Polar.
and they would Polar, and they would ship it to Buffalo and Toronto and New York. Everybody had their Cleveland. They all had their vintage thing. And I put on my guide that all seltzer is fine. So what's the issue and why was it controversial? Do you know where they get the carbon dioxide from? Beer factories. It's pure chametz. So, because that's actually how seltzer was invented in the 1700s. Someone could Wikipedia this and let me know what facts I'm getting wrong. I think it was like 1710 in England. Someone he owned a beer factory and he was drinking water and he went to lunch and he put it down above the vat. He came back afterwards to get his water and it was all bubbly. And that's how seltzer didn't exist that we know of until then at a mass market level. So then they started to sell the carbon dioxide and they would get it from these beer factories. I would say like 60% comes from there. So, it needs a kasher for Pesach. However, about 10 years ago, a sefer came out called Halicha Shlomo, based on the writings of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And there was a footnote there. I was reading it one Pesach. When you're a young rabbi, at least I did, I would sit in my study till 1 a.m. for a month before Pesach, go through every sefer I could find in Halacha. So I was reading through the sefer, literally cover to cover. And I see they asked him about it. He said, what's the problem? Gas has no mamashos. You can't touch it. It doesn't count. It's meaningless in halacha. They went to ask his mechutin, Rebbe Yashiv. He said, what's the problem? So I put in my guide that all seltzer that's plain is fine. And I didn't want to get a call that year. So I learned my lesson and I started putting footnotes. And that's where, if you ever read things that I write, I always have footnotes. It started from this. So I said, here's the source. And again, I think it took 2 years. Every guide now says it. I don't know about Blumenkranz's. I know the CRC started saying it, but since about 6 years ago, the Star K now says it. The OU now says it. Of about 5-6 years ago, they usually follow each other. So yeah, seltzer's fine, even though it comes from chametz. There you go. All right, guys. Have a great night. That's an hour, and that's a wrap. Have a good Shabbos.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Rabbi.